community, it is a pleasure to welcome you all once again for our final event of Lent term. Before I begin this evening, I would like to remind you all of a couple of our house rules. First of all, we ask that you do not film or photograph during the course of the event. We have professionals whose job it is to do this, and we ask that you please leave that job up to the professionals. Otherwise, the format of this evening will allow time for audience questions at the end, so please do leave any sort of interjections or interruptions to that question and answer period. Otherwise, it is my pleasure to welcome our esteemed guest this afternoon. She needs no introduction, but she is the former Minister of International Relations and Cooperation for South Africa. It is a pleasure for us to be doing this event with her and the Cambridge Centre for Palestine Studies. So please welcome, alongside Dr. Makram Khoury-Machool, Dr. Naledi Pandor. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. I wanted to ask if you had a few sort of opening words for the audience this afternoon before we jumped into the questions.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for inviting me to address you. I'm very popular at home, so normally I'm used to a very full hall. But really, thank you to all of you for being here. Well, I thought I should begin by talking about our foundation, which is the Nelson Mandela Legacy Foundation. I'm the new chair of the foundation, and we have, as the foundation, adopted an important 3-year strategy through which we're trying to give effect to the mandate that President Mandela left to the foundation. We have called that 3-year strategy Khoury-Machool, which is his given name. Khoury-Machool means shake the tree, and added to the name, we have said making good trouble. The reason that we've adopted that concept of making good trouble is linked to the call President Mandela often made to us as South Africans to say, could we have people who make good trouble? Because he said you can live a daily existence and have no impact at all on society, or you could be prepared to make good trouble and change the world for the better. And so in our foundation, we're calling on more and more people to make good trouble. And we do this in a range of ways. Firstly, we're trying to develop young leaders who walk in the footsteps of Mandela and understand that his primary reason for leadership was to achieve social equity, justice, and the enjoyment of human rights by all people. Second aspect is related to the notion Mandela had that as a people who had been oppressed, our freedom meant that we had a responsibility to be concerned about the freedom of others. And thus, we couldn't comfortably enjoy our freedom if there were others in the world who were experiencing harm. He spoke in 1998 in one of his foreign policy speeches about the fact that South Africans could not be fully free until the people of Palestine were free, because he recognized that the oppression of one means the oppression of others. And he illustrated this idea of a shared oppression by referring to the fact that while South Africans in the mass population had made a significant contribution to the struggle against apartheid through mass action, through protest, through boycott, through calls for sanctions, but a primary contributor to the freedom of South Africans was the international solidarity campaign. The fact that the anti-apartheid leaders of the liberation movements in South Africa, managed by going through different countries in the world to convince civil society organizations in particular, and ordinary men and women, that while apartheid was taking place in South Africa, the southernmost tip of Africa, very far from everywhere else, all humanity had to be concerned because apartheid was a crime against humanity. And this notion was accepted by millions of people all over the world. This is why women in Dublin, in Ireland, working as retail workers, refused to handle South African products and discouraged their customers from buying products from South Africa. Ordinary women, ordinary workers. This is why dock workers in Italy would not offload South African goods. This is why theologians agreed that apartheid was a crime against humanity. This is why the people of Australia refused to allow apartheid sport and said there can be no sport if it is not inclusive of all South Africans. No to apartheid sport. New Zealand joined the people of Australia, and they were the most vocal advocates of freedom of sport. So through embracing the notion of international solidarity, large numbers of actors in many, many countries throughout the world supported our struggle for freedom and became a strategic part of us achieving democracy and human rights in our country. I refer to this because people often ask us, why is South Africa concerned about Palestine? Surely the cause for freedom of Palestinians is of no interest to South Africans. It doesn't benefit them in any way. And we remind people that when we went to Ireland, when we went to the Netherlands, when we went to Palestine, because we spoke to Palestinians as well, all the people we met embraced us and said, we will, in whatever small way we can, we will support your struggle. And it is for this reason that we have felt it imperative as South Africa that we stand up for the people of Palestine in their time of need, and that we advocate for their self-determination, for their sovereignty, for their freedom. In similar vein, we believe attention must be given to Israelis' desire for freedom and democracy as well. So we are not by any means anti-Semitic, as I saw is claimed in the Daily Telegraph, I think it's called. They've labeled me an evil woman and appealed to Professor to prevent me from speaking here at the Union. Now, what we are seeing in the world today, in the current geopolitical climate, is a very worrying decline in respect for human rights, in respect for freedom of expression, and in respect for international law. And I think all these features of the current geopolitical polycrises should worry all of us. I have been particularly concerned at the impact on universities. There's been a significant decline in academic freedom in various parts of the world. I found vice-chancellors are afraid to have protests on their campuses. How is this plausible? I have been amazed that politicians can tell universities what concepts they should teach. This is quite incredible, and it is antithetical to academic freedom. I recall how in our country, when we were writing our constitution, academics approached us in the new democratic parliament, and they said, under apartheid, we could not express ourselves freely. We were told what to teach, we were told who to admit, We were told what kind of knowledge we could generate. We hope you, the new government, the democratic government elected by everyone, will enshrine academic freedom in the Constitution. Initially, we were very wary because we knew that many universities had collaborated with the apartheid state. But fortunately, reason prevailed, and we incorporated academic freedom and freedom to research in the clause on freedom of expression. And it has been of great value in our society. So there is no way in which you would have a premier of one of our provinces telling academics what to teach, telling academics that the concept equality cannot be used in their academic programs. We would never tolerate that in our country. So I really think that it is important that we don't view the harm being visited upon a particular population group as signaling just an individual isolated action of harm. The denial of human rights in one region, in one territory, will eventually be embraced by politicians in other territories, and you will see a reduction in freedom. So it is our view that as the government of South Africa, at the time I'm no longer a government person, I've retired, it's the most pleasant retirement. So as government at the time of taking on the case of genocide against Israel at the International Court of Justice, we had become concerned that as part of the world of the international law community, we were watching in silence on television while thousands were being massacred. And we felt we had a responsibility in terms of international law, not because we like it or because we wish to be sensational, but in terms of accepted international law, we felt our government had to take a step. We are signatories to the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and we acted in terms of that convention. It was our hope that the whole world will join us, would be as shocked as we were at what we were seeing on the television screens. But initially we were extremely isolated. We now have 18 countries that have joined, and so the support and recognition of a genocide being committed is growing. The concern is it took so long to persuade when so many of us are signatories of these important conventions. I recall how quick our governments were in calling on the International Criminal Court to issue a warrant against President Putin. And when it came to Prime Minister Netanyahu, all of us were reluctant and didn't wish to go that route. We believe international law must be practiced equally for all perpetrators, whoever they may be, and that there can't be one group that is allowed to practice harm and another that is found wanting when it is oppressive. So just as we have put forward the case against Israel, so countries need to put a case against the RSF in Sudan, because similar atrocities are being committed, and it can't be left to one country, because many of our governments signed these conventions of international law, signed these treaties, such as the Treaty of Rome. So we don't create international law in order to allow an escape from responsibility. And I think, just as with the case against apartheid South Africa, what we need are people who are prepared to make good trouble. Not trouble, not violence, not, bombing others, good trouble. Trouble that leads to change in the condition of oppressed peoples. So I'm calling on you as academics, as students, as leaders in civil society, to play a role in changing the condition of those who are oppressed for the better, in using your immense intellectual wealth to make a contribution to changing our world and to ensuring that those who desire freedom and self-determination achieve it. Just as you help South Africans to achieve this, I believe we can make a similar effort toward the freedom of the people of Palestine as well as those of Israel. Because if the two enjoy democracy and freedom in a democratic state, I'm sure we would all have a safer, secure, and better world. Thank you very much. I think.
And thank you very much, Dr. Pandor, for your opening remarks. I'll go ahead and get started with a question myself. So you mentioned sort of international law and the efforts to adhere to it, and oftentimes critics of international law will often point to its unenforceability, which is a critique that came up again after the ICJ's ruling of genocide, or ICJ's ruling against Israel in the genocide case that South Africa brought forward. What are your thoughts on that? How do you think supranational organizations can do more to make sure that international law is effectively enforced?
Well, I want to go back to the comment I made about equal action for all individuals, countries, and people. With respect to South Africa, we made international law work in support of the oppressed. For example, the United Nations established the UN Committee Against Apartheid. They expelled South Africa in terms of Chapter 6 of the Charter. So action was taken. But it seems we had a more moral world at that time, and somehow we've had a decline in our perspectives on human rights. So given the awful events that we are seeing in recent times, I think we need somewhat of a revival. Maybe in spirit, but certainly in our attitude toward human rights. It's really disappointing that so many countries neglect respect for international law, and what we're seeing is increased harm, increased abuse. When we had the decisions on provisional measures by the International Court of Justice, I indicated that if there was going to be a positive response from Israel to those provisional measures, we would be hopeful that a better world would emerge. But if they were ignored and neglected, then we were opening up room. It's like an open sesame for all who wish to commit atrocities. And that's what we're seeing in Sudan and other parts of the world, the DRC and Eastern DRC, horrible atrocities. And once we have this notion that I can do what I like as long as I have a gun in my hand, this is a terrible world. So part of my answer would be, one, that our leaders need to respect international law, but I'm now looking less and less at leaders and more at civil society, at us, and what we're doing and what we demand as action from our leaders. Because I think we have a great responsibility to act and to insist that we wish to have better measures and a better world. But in conclusion, I do support the idea that we need fundamental reform of the UN. I think its status has been diminished terribly over several decades. I think that the fact that it has to rely largely on a single major donor is a real problem, because ideology drives what the UN does. I also think the Israel war in Gaza has clearly indicated that we need much more than peacekeeping. We need peace enforcement capability as we work to reform the UN. We cannot leave it purely to peacekeeping. We've got to think very differently of having a component that is able to protect innocent civilian populations.
Absolutely. Do you think as well, sort of bouncing off of your answer to that question, that the sort of international solidarity that was formed in response to apartheid and the atrocities going on then is as strong today? Or do you think that there's been sort of a weakening of that international solidarity and alongside it maybe the power of civil society to prevent or respond to atrocities in the global world?
You know, I've often asked myself, why did the world think it was all right to urge protest and boycott and sanctions against apartheid South Africa for the majority oppressed? And why don't we feel the same way about Palestinians? And part of my answer lies in, I think Islamophobia has had a very, very significant effect on how we see other people. And so before we think of human rights, we think of hatred, we think of fear. And this has been ingrained because it's promoted by media, by entertainment, you know, so we are so full of propaganda that we can no longer see the impact on human beings like ourselves. So I really think that civil society has to be, you know, assisted. That, of course, is not to neglect in any way the immense response that there has been globally, especially among young people. Thank goodness for young people. The oldies have somewhat failed us, especially those in governments. But young people are beginning to respond. I'm not sure how sustainable it is, but there's been a clear signal that they're aware of human rights, they're aware of injustice, and are ready to reject it. And I think it's very important and hopeful.
Absolutely. So bouncing over to some of the comments you were talking about earlier in regards to sort of the atrocities we're seeing, especially in recent days, it's obviously well known that Trump has taken a particularly harsh foreign policy stance, which the US and the UK have sort of signed on to more widely. What do you think sort of regional powers ought to do and react to some of the atrocities that we're seeing today? And more widely, what do you think, you know, the world should be doing in response to this sort of increased aggression from huge global powers?
I'm extremely concerned that we've allowed a unipolarity that is extremely hegemonic and dominant to enjoy sway in the world today in so many quarters, economic, military, and other areas. And the world is paying the price for that. What should be looked at is whether it's plausible to have a counterweight to that malevolent development, because we can't allow it to continue. You know, as events occur, what you ask yourself is, who's next? You know, and we're very worried in South Africa because we have a huge port, and we're just wondering, you know, is our territory next? We're already suffering great harm from tariff imposition and from the propaganda that there's a white genocide in our country, which is absolutely untrue, but it has currency and has been allowed, you know, to exist as false information believed by the leader of the largest economy in the world. I mean, so we need really to see the development of effective ideologies counter to what exists. If only China and Russia could embrace progressive democratic ideals, that could be a basis. But I'm not sure we're there as yet. And I really think that is what is needed. Because as long as I believe I'm the most powerful and I can do what I like, and I'm not concerned about the values associated with that, then the world is in trouble.
Absolutely.
Your Excellency, it's a pleasure to have you here at this historically important event, this collaborative event between the Cambridge Center for Palestine Studies and the Student Union Debating Society. You have been an educator most of your life. You were exiled also in London. And you have been even now talking about important values and norms that perhaps the youngsters should be embracing. These days, we have been all the time being confronted with the propaganda that you mentioned about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And I'll try to disentangle it in order to get your opinion about it. In the past, an Israeli Minister of Education, whom I personally knew, Shulamit Aloni, she was from the left. She argued in one interview, it's on YouTube, that the best and first trick that many Zionist groups in the world pull out in order to attack anyone is to accuse them of anti-Semitism. Now, based on your experience, what should the world do in order to disentangle and to separate and to differentiate between anyone who would like to take to court any criminal and between the Jews and the feeling of anti-Semitism? What should be done? Because people are still struggling. Anything that some, and let's put it bluntly, some extremist Zionists, they don't need to be Jews at all, they can be anybody, that if they don't want to hear something and they don't like anything, they immediately accuse you, him, me, them of being anti-Semitic. What do you think should be done, perhaps educationally, sociologically, in order to tackle this, please?
Well, at the foundation, we have a program through which we're trying to discuss with the various religious communities, particularly of the Christian faith, the notion of Christian Zionism, which has begun to take hold within the Christian community in our country in response to building a bulwark against the ICJ case that the government led. So we've begun this program, and really it's to bring the various faiths together because not all people of the Jewish faith are Zionist. Not all Christians are Christian Zionists or believe in that notion. Not all Muslims are evil, So we're trying to bring all the faiths together, and we've created a platform through which we have an exchange of ideas and the development of joint programs in a multi-faith setting. Now, that very program has been labeled anti-Semitic, and I've been accused in the press of weaponizing the Nelson Mandela Foundation. I found that program there. I didn't initiate it. So I've often said in public that everyone should remember that insults are the last refuge of a scoundrel. And we need to reiterate this consistently. But I think that illogic must be fought by reason, by knowledge, by intellect. And so I do encourage people to write. I think we're not writing enough. We're not publishing articles that challenge these orthodoxies. There's a practice that has developed now where certain NGOs associated with the Zionist Federation in our country have been funding young people and religious leaders and traditional leaders to visit Israel, fully funded, and then they have to come back and make a negative statement about Naledi Pandor or the South African government or the struggle of the Palestinian people. Now, in our country, we've had huge problems with the issue of corruption, particularly in the public sector. And we've developed a number of practices to try and lift up the level of ethical conduct. One of these requirements is that you declare all sponsorship, gifts, and so on. And what is interesting is these religious leaders are being funded. They're paid, a lot of them, through funding by their congregants. Traditional leaders are paid through state funding in the public sector. But nobody's declaring these visits. So something is going wrong and is being encouraged. And sadly, when these people come back from these visits, they say the most ridiculous things. And as far as I'm aware, none of them ever visit the occupied territories. So they're not aware at all of what we're talking about when we refer to Gaza or the West Bank. They just don't have a sense of it. To them, what they see in Tel Aviv is the reality, and the rest is our imagination. And they're selected very carefully so that they're able to continue to articulate this propaganda. And this is happening with large groups of individuals. And then you get access to the media, and they say all sorts of things. So one of them came back from a trip and he said, you know, Naledi Pandor is married to an Iranian. I mean, you know. I said, I didn't know that. Wow. My husband, you know, so ridiculous things like that. It's quite frightening. Also the attacks on you personally, you know. So there's an intention to intimidate so that you'll then be silenced. You know, as I say, this article in the Telegraph, at the end they say the paper attempted to contact Pandor. I've never been contacted, but she was not available. Not once has anybody from the Telegraph, you know, contacted me, and I'm easy to access in South Africa. So that is part of, you know, intimidation. They've asked one of the secretaries of state here to ensure that my visa is revoked, as the US revoked my visa last year, so that I should not be allowed to the United Kingdom. Well, if I'm saying such unimportant things, why is it so important to silence me? It means there's a truth someone is afraid of. And we need to continue speaking the truth and finding ways of getting out the message. The issue is very simple and basic. People deserve to have sovereignty. People deserve to enjoy justice. People deserve to enjoy human rights. These are not the property of a select group of people. People thought they were the right of white people in our country. We rejected that. We fought against it. And we now have democracy and freedom. Don't yet enjoy full access to human rights. Many of our people still experience inequality and huge levels of poverty. But basic civil and political freedoms we have won. And everyone should have access to that. It doesn't belong to me or you, or, you know. It's all of us, all human beings. And I think what we need to do, as Mr. Mandela believed, is we need to see all of us as human beings. That will advance our progress much better than the way we view each other today.
You mentioned the role and the awakening of the youth, of the youngsters. Could you kindly let us know how would it be possible to maintain this wave globally which supports freedom and justice, particularly Palestine?
Well, I think we need to encourage young people and educate them so that, for me, it's not about protest only. It's about understanding why you stand up. What is it that we're all striving for? What kind of world do we want to build? So I think talking about international law, about human rights, about justice, about social equity, all those important concepts, because I believe we must have a youth and a leadership that understands what these concepts mean and how important they are to the world. I am really worried at present that the current geopolitical domain, which is riven by crises, has detracted from what we were attempting to do 5 years ago, which is to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Development has gone off the agenda. And so many people are left poor and without support and attention. We have had a reversal in addressing equity. And this should frighten all of us, because we're just creating conditions for more trouble in the future. On the African continent, I've been extremely concerned that people are now beginning to have a disaffection toward democracy, because they're not seeing democracy impacting positively on their lives. 20 years ago, the civilian population in several African countries would have stood up and objected to coups. Today, they're embracing coup leaders. This is a real reversal for the continent. And if we do not attend to the interests of people, to strengthening democracy, to ensuring that the public sector is responsive to ordinary men and women, we're going to have a very difficult world. And I'm glad I'm out of politics.
Now, at this time, I want to turn over to the audience to see if there are any questions from our audience members this evening. So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand.
There are two here.
Yeah, I did see it at the front. And we'll run a mic over to you. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, yes. It's the green microphone. The green one, is it not working?
Hello.
There we go.
Thank you, Minister Pandor. As you know, yesterday, the 21st of March, was the anniversary of, or it's the Human Rights Day of the Sharpeville massacre, where 69 protesters were killed by the by the apartheid government 66 years ago. Of course, since that, our country's embraced human rights. Your father, of course, having been one of the drafters of the Freedom Charter, the precursor to our Constitution, embracing rights of freedom of expression, human dignity, the right to protest, the right against arbitrary detention. I wanted to ask, given your position as the former Minister of International Relations, why South Africa has taken its position with regard to the brutal, oppressive regime in Iran and the crackdown that it's had on innocent protesters exercising those liberties, or attempting to exercise those liberties, since December last year, where the reports say that between 20 and 40,000 people have been killed by the government between up till now. The majority of those deaths occurring between the 8th and the 9th of January. When the United Nations met, South Africa on the 23rd of January decided to abstain instead of condemning what occurred. And while this was going on, between the 9th and the 16th of January, South Africa performed joint military operations in Cape Town and Simonstown with the Iranian military. And then on the 6th of February, the minister in the presidency, Minister Chikunga, decided that it was appropriate to celebrate the Iranian Islamic Revolution, the 47th anniversary in the nation's capital. Given what you said about how we cannot comfortably enjoy freedom while others are being oppressed, and that international solidarity was incredibly important in our country's history, what is your feeling on what South Africa has decided to do in ignoring the plight of the Iranian civilians?
Well, Iran is not an enemy of South Africa. We have good relations with the state of Iran. And our struggle was not imposed on us by others. We stood up for ourselves. We didn't go and ask, and we weren't told by some other government that we were oppressed. We recognized our oppression, and we formed organizations and acted to engage in struggle. So you can't impose a struggle on people. People must stand up and will fight their struggle. The more you impose, the more I think you're just causing great difficulty, as you're seeing with the recent 3 weeks that all of us have been experiencing. It's not bringing freedom, it's bringing greater suffering, loss of infrastructure, more death of the ordinary civilian population. So you can't impose anything on people. If the Iranian people were to come and ask South Africa and say, support us to the political parties as we did, or civil society, then the decision would have to be taken. But at present, we have good relations with Iran. We have got no quarrel with them at present. I do think there should be improved democratic practice and access for the people of Iran, but they're not an enemy of South Africa.
Any further questions? Yeah, in the front row.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. A great admirer of your international activism. I was outside protesting at the ICJ when South Africa, opened the case. I'm from Myanmar, and I've been, a good travel maker for a good 36 years as an exile. And I'm involved with the Gambia's case peripherally against the state of Myanmar, my own country. Just wondering why two major instigators of legal action against Myanmar and state of Israel are Africans, whereas in fact many of us from former colonial societies did not invent the international law. This was installed by the victors of Second World War. And, to the contrary to our expectations that liberal, democratic, Western, European, and American states would activate the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. In many cases, they have been the impediment to apply the law universally. I'm just wondering if you care to comment on this, what I consider deeply colonial nature of the selective application of international law.
I think it's an interesting academic question. I've often wondered why South Africa chose reconciliation and not retribution, and why a people who had been so oppressed exhibit such high level of principled practice. It's odd to me. And I think perhaps attitude derives from experience, from context, but I do think it's something that we all need to probe much more. We wrote our constitution based on our experience of oppression. So you'll find in our constitution, people have a right not to be tortured, women enjoy the right to equality, we provide for affirmative action, which we are being berated for at the moment, despite the fact that 85% of the country's wealth remains in the hands of our white population in our country, despite everything that is said, because, as I said, one of the things that those who hold power like to do is to actually be dishonest. This is why a civil society organization in our country was able to take photos of a site in the Democratic Republic of Congo and say, this is South Africa, to President Trump in the White House. because there's a huge intention to paint us as undemocratic, uncivilized, violent, not deserving of enjoying freedom. And I think the answer lies in racism, which W.E.B. Du Bois said was one of the most difficult challenges facing humanity. And I think once you have appropriated the notion of racial superiority, it becomes so ingrained in you that even when you're being racist, you don't even recognize it. It just seems a natural part of what you say and who you are. And I think we have a lot of that, unfortunately, because there have been centuries of oppression and discrimination. And as we emerge into newly democratic societies, you're confronted with this character of society where, a person, we've had people in South Africa who will say things like, I wasn't privileged. That's not true. If you came from a particular racial group, you enjoyed privilege. You can lie about it, but you did. But this appropriation of this notion of inherent superiority influences how you think. We didn't appropriate it, and I hope we never do. What we have tried to embrace as our beliefs is a belief that we should find ways of achieving social equity, that we must try to empower our people and have a shared economy, that we have a duty to end poverty. It's a very serious problem in South Africa, and that the matter of joblessness should be addressed as well. So very basic notions have been adopted, and we try to promote them. Where we have failed is the practice of corruption, which unfortunately was and is still widespread in the public sector. We're fighting it, but it's there, and it's a cancer which is very hard to get rid of. But the core notions of freedom, justice, and democracy remain part of the rubric that we try to advance.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one more question.
Yeah, Professor Spurl.
Professor Spurl.
Thank you for your very moving presentation. I have a question about the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. How successful do you think this commission has been, and to what extent do you think it would ever become a model to be applied at some future stage in the Israel-Palestine situation?
Well, I think it worked for South Africa because it was modeled in a South African way, really. We spent a lot of time thinking about how it should be constructed, designed, what it should seek to do. And one of the objectives we had is we wanted to know the truth. So we wanted to create the opportunity for the perpetrators to come forward and speak about what they had done. Because people wanted to know where were their daughters, what happened to their fathers, what happened to their sons, and so on. So we wanted the truth to be told. But we provided that if you came forward and told the truth, you'd be granted amnesty. However, if you came and told the truth, but you actually had committed such terrible crimes, you would be referred to the prosecuting authority to be charged for crimes against humanity. So with a few you had that. Some accepted this. Others came before the commission and they lied. We didn't have sufficient resources for a large investigative capacity, and I think that was a gap. And unfortunately, at the close of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, some of the cases, especially of those that were referred to the prosecutorial administration were not followed through. So a lot of the perpetrators have got away. We now have a commission in place in South Africa looking at why that happened and what can be done about it, because the TRC statute allows for follow-up, so it doesn't die once the process with Archbishop Desmond Tutu had ended. But what we didn't want was to create a room for a sense of retribution and forever hanging on to our past. We wish to move forward. And really, I think our country is somewhat of a model society in the way in which we've begun to embrace our South Africanness in different ways. We allow for diversity, and I think in the broad terms we've accepted that we are South African, we're diverse, but we're a nation together. Trying to build that social cohesion, but broadly, we've accepted that. And I think we rather love our country, especially when we win rugby. So we're fun. We're not good at soccer, but we're trying. So that has helped, but the difference was made by the leaders. You had very mature, experienced political leaders who were ready to face the population when there was objection to decisions that some people did not agree with. So when some from the liberation movement had to be called before the TRC, our leaders agreed, Mandela and so on. One of the most stark moments indicating that South Africa had begun to turn the corner was when President Mandela attempted to tell the rugby union how the team South Africa should be composed. The union took Mr. Mandela to court. It was very new in our democracy, and everybody thought, this is ridiculous. How can you take that man to court again, at that age, and as the new president of a free South Africa? And many in government tried to say to Mr. Mandela, you can't go to court. Let the Minister of Justice represent you. He said, no, I am respondent number one. I must go to court. It's important that our people recognize that we respect the independence of the judiciary as a separate wing of government. So I think part of the answer lies in our leaders, that we were fortunate to have that caliber of leaders who were ready to really stand up for this new state that they were trying to create. Other countries have developed different models. For example, Rwanda has adopted a TRC-type notion, but it's more community-based, it's more organic than the formal statute we had. And it seems to have worked a bit better for the Rwandans, but of course, they've also been helped by the ICC, which has played an important role, and the residual committee of the UN. We had a case recently of a chap that was being looked for by the residual committee, and he was rumored to be in South Africa. We tried to find him, but couldn't locate him in South Africa. But the UN committee, every time they reported, they said he's in South Africa. So we then created a multi-departmental team of the police, intelligence, and so on. And when the man dared to come into the country in 2023, we got him. And he's now going to be charged at the ICC. So that process has been the Rwandan one. It's a formal international court, but also their own organic community processes. Kenya tried to do something like us, but it hasn't quite worked. I understand there's talk in some other countries of a similar law. Sri Lanka, we've engaged with them over many years, and certain groups don't want our model because they don't want to have a judicial prosecutorial process as we had. But we continue to talk to them about perhaps drawing on our model but modifying it to suit their circumstance, because they don't want to raise ethnic tensions, because it's very ethnic in composition, that division. So they're looking at our TLC and talking to people like Mr. Ramaphosa, who was very involved, and Judge Nzebeza, who was part of the commission.
And the second part of Professor Spell's question, can it be applied ever, or should it be, or is it the right model to be applied?
That's why I'm saying that I think it's a model, but you modify in terms of context. I think context is always important.
And leaders.
Yeah, and of course, as I said, leaders.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Please, everyone, give Dr. Pandor a warm round of applause. We do have one gift for you this evening.
Thank you. So wonderful. Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you very much. This will be my prized possession.